Chapter 6 is all about percents. Now, the good thing is that you learned a lot of this stuff in 6th grade, especially these first two sections. 6.1 is all about converting between percents and decimals. So really, there's only two things from this section you need to take out of it. The first thing you need to do whenever you're starting with a percent and trying to change into a decimal is, of course, remove the percent symbol itself. After that, then you're going to divide by 100 or simply just move the decimal point 2 places to the left. So the thing with this is make sure you know where the decimal point is starting. For example, if we're starting with 23%, the decimal point is immediately after the 3. So when you move it 2 places to the left, it becomes 0.23. Now you may be wondering why we actually divide by 100. But the word percent actually means per 100. So if you have 23%, that's 23 out of a possible 100%. So we're really just putting the value in comparison to the hundredth place of our decimal. Okay, so let's try a couple examples now. So if we wanted to write 24% as a decimal, first thing I want to do is write the number without the percent sign. Since it's 24, the decimal point is technically starting immediately behind the 4. So when you move it 2 places to the left, it now becomes 0.24. Sometimes whenever you go to jump 2 places to the left, you actually go past the number itself. So when we have 7% and we drop the decimal point, since our decimal point is immediately after the 7 and we go 2 spaces to the left, it creates that kind of open hole. When this happens, all you need to do is just fill in a 0 as kind of a placeholder. So this is really going to become 0.07. Now, if you think about it, 7%, that'd be 7 out of 100, so 7/100ths, which is exactly where this 7 ended up. Okay, so I have full confidence you guys can try these next 5 out on your own. So I'm just going to go ahead and fill these in. So just pause it, and then whenever you're ready to check, hit play again. All right, so make sure you guys compare your answers. The ones I want you to be careful of are ones like B, C, and E. Make sure you're starting from wherever the decimal point is shown. So if it's 107, then it's after the 7. If it's 0.3%, you have to start in that decimal point that's between the 0 and the 3. You can have a very small decimal coming from a smaller percent. It just depends on what the number is. Now, if you're trying to go from a decimal to percent, it's exactly the same process except a little bit backwards. So instead of dividing by 100, we're going to take that decimal and multiply by 100 by moving our decimal place 2 spots to the right. And then afterwards, of course, you need to put the percent sign so that we know we're looking at a percent and not a whole number. So for example, if we have 0.36, you can see the decimal point right there between the 0 and the 3. So move it 2 spots to the right and it becomes 36%. And again, just make sure you include the symbol. With these kinds of problems, you can feel free to do the jumps right on the problem itself unless it doesn't leave you enough room. But for example, if we have 0.47, we want to write as percent. I'm going to take that decimal point that I see between the 0 and the 4 and go 2 spots to the right, which means I'm going to have 47%. Okay. Same thing happens for B. If I have 0.663, I can see the decimal point, so I can jump 2 spots. It falls right between the 6 and the 3, so I have 66.3%. Your percents can also be decimal points, so don't second guess yourself if it does happen to end up like that. We can also have percents that are higher than 100. For example, for C, we have 1.8 as a percent. So because there's not too much room, I'm going to rewrite this one. So whenever I go to move my decimal point, I go 2 spaces, and I'm ending up with that open space again like we had in those first couple examples. So just fill in a 0, which means that I have 180%. And finally for D, if it's 0.009, I just take that decimal point, move it twice, one more time, and then I have 0.9%. I know there's 2 other zeros in front of that initial one, but you don't need to show all those, just 1 0 is enough. So same thing as before, I have full confidence in you guys, you know how to move 2 decimal places to the right, so just pause it real quick and then hit play whenever you're ready to check your answers for these next 2. Okay, so you should have ended up with 0.5% and 30.6% for those 2 on your own. Now the last thing we have here is we can also write a fraction as a percent and a decimal. So if you receive a 92 out of 100 on your math test, that is really saying that you got a 92 over 100 if we look at it as a fraction. So how can we represent this as a decimal? This we learned back in chapter 2, I believe. So if it's 92 hundredths, we just have to have our 92 and make sure that our last digit falls in the hundredths place, which means that it has to just be that decimal point before the 9. Now 0.92 is a percent. We just take that decimal point and move it 2 times to the right, so really we're dealing with a 92%. Now 92 over 100 is a very easy example, but all you would have to do to turn this fraction into a decimal on your calculator is just do 92 divided by 100, and you should see that you get 0.92. So with this real-life example, the figure shows the portions of ultraviolet rays are reflected by 4 different surfaces. They want to know how many times more UV rays are reflected by water than sea foam. So we're going to look at just these 2 values on the right. Now, 25% as a decimal, we can easily convert by moving 2 places to the left. So we know this is 0.25. 21 over 25, however, is kind of hard to look at, so if you type in 21 divided by 25 in your calculator, it should show you 0.84. So now that they're both as decimals, we can deal with them a little easier. How many times more is really telling us to divide these 2 numbers. So if we're talking water to sea foam, we're going to do 0.84, and we're going to divide it by 0.25. So after we type that in, it's showing us that the water reflects 3.36 times more UV rays than the sea foam. Now, this whole idea of changing fractions to decimals and percents to decimals and vice versa is going to help us out a lot for section 6.2. This entire section is just about comparing, ordering, fractions, decimals, and percents. So whenever you're comparing these 3 things, it's easiest if you write them in all one format before you actually compare them. Now, you may have a preference one or the other, but I will tell you that usually decimals are the way to go. Since we now have access to our calculators, this makes everything 1,000 times easier. So for this first example, they want to know which is greater, 3 over 20 or 16%. Now, if we want to know what 3 over 20 is as a decimal, just type into your calculator 3 divided by 20, since each fraction is really just showing a division problem between those 2 numbers. Once you type it in, you'll see that 3 over 20 is really equal to 0.15. Now, it's compared to 16%, but we know that 16% is really just 0.16 once we move that decimal point 2 places over to the left. So if we have 0.15 and 0.16, we know that the 16% is the greater of the 2 numbers. Now, for example 2, when you're comparing a percent or a decimal, this one you could honestly go either way. I'm just going to change the 79% into a decimal. So I know that 79% is the same as 0.79, again, by just moving that decimal point. So if I'm comparing 0.79 to 0.08, I automatically know that the 0.79 is greater. Again, it's completely your choice. You can deal with fractions if you really want to, but I would advise against it. Okay, so go ahead and try these 2, and then we'll move on to the 2 examples. Okay, so hopefully you got that 7 over 25 was greater for letter A and that 94% was greater for B. Okay, now for this example, we have Brandon, David, and Alok each take the same number of shots at a soccer goal. Brandon takes 72% of his shots, David makes 19 over 25 of his shots, and Alok makes 0.67 of shots. Who made the fewest shots? So with this, again, you're just changing them all into the same format. Again, I recommend decimals. So for Brandon, we know that 72% is equal to 0.72. Now, David's fraction, if you take your calculator and do 19 over 25, you'll end up seeing that it is 0.76. And then, of course, Alok's decimal is already taken care of, so we don't have to do anything with his value. So if the question is who made the fewest amount of shots, then our choice is going to be Alok, since he made 0.67 compared to the other 2 boys, which is, of course, greater than his value. So for the last on your own, I want you to list the 5 states in order by population from least to greatest. Honestly, it's just going to be making sure you read the directions to make sure that you're listing whatever information in the correct order. So the first thing you're going to do is put all 5 of these states into the same format and then rate them from least to greatest. So go ahead and try this out and then hit play to see the answer. Hopefully this is the order you came up with. Again, if you change everything to decimals, 2 of the states were already in decimal format, so you only had 3 to take care of. So it would go Washington, Michigan, Ohio, New York, and California, based on the decimals that you see over there on the right. All right, well, that's it for the first two sections of Chapter 6. So if you have any questions, make sure you see me.